to the Santana Show. I am Naomi Santana, and my guest today is Will Carpenter. Will is a vocalist
Hello.
and guitarist from the band Ships Have Sailed. Welcome, Will.
Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
How did you come up with the name Ships Have Sailed?
This is a funny story. It's really hard to find good band names, especially these days. I mean, it has to have been a struggle for forever, but now that there's been so many bands throughout history, it gets harder and harder every time a new one pops up, right? So when this was kind of starting, um, it was just a collection of songs that I really felt a connection to personally, and I didn't want to. They weren't a fit for the band that I was in at the time. It had that project had a very specific genre, and these songs were not a fit for that. Um, and I didn't want to kind of like start pitching them for other artists because I wanted to do them myself. So I just kind of started um, producing demos and um, had a couple friends over once. A couple of them were pretty presentable, like fairly presentable, and they were just like, oh, this is cool, what are you going to call it? So I was basically like, oh, what am I going to call it? And then the project that I was in, which had quite a bit of momentum actually, there were 6 members and not everybody was seeing eye to eye. And as we were kind of like rising up through like the area where money starts to happen, um, some folks were getting paid and other folks noticed that they weren't. And so it kind of started, we tried to kind of like go back to the drawing board and revisit an agreement that would basically make sure that everybody was taken care of, but it became pretty clear that it was going to be you know not long for this world. So I was going through a lot of emotions around that. I had invested a lot of time and energy in that project, and it was really sad to see it come so close, and then kind of like, for the worst of all reasons, not make it, right? And so I was doing a lot of contemplation. At the same time, I was really excited about where this project was going. The songs were coming together, and that collection of songs turned into our first EP someday. And so I was kind of like, maybe I'd had a couple too many glasses of wine late at night, and I was kind of just pondering in my head, which I have an overactive brain, so it kind of does that sometimes. And I was just like, okay, well, there's nothing you can do about this whole situation, so you're going to have to move on. That ship has sailed. And I was like, but like, yeah, you can look at it as a missed opportunity, but a missed opportunity can actually push you in the direction of another opportunity. And so the phrase "that ship has sailed" is like a little bit too negative. Like, sometimes the thing that we're missing, although it may not feel great at the time, could be pushing you down a better path for yourself. And you're not going to know until you know. So I was like, that's a little bit of a negative phrase. It should be like more agnostic. It should be "ships have sailed," right? Because life is this whole like interweb of, these pathways that you can choose and go down, and they'll each lead you in different directions. But eventually, I like to think that we wind up where we belong. And as soon as that little kind of like shift to the phrase popped into my head, I was like, wow, that would actually make a really good band name. And I was like, it's got to be taken. So I Googled it, and sure enough, it was available. Like, the domain name was available, all the social handles were available. So I registered them all immediately, and that was it.
Wow, that's a great story. And also, like, the name is really catchy too. Ships Have Sailed.
Thank you. We get a few haters online who basically say, your handle looks like or ship shave." And I'm just like, that's really an interesting like you dug deep for that one, didn't you? Like it's funny. I love the name. It's kind of like it has become my philosophy, and it's become the project's philosophy over the years, because really, like, and we're all learning about this year for sure, regardless of the struggles that you're going through, I have found that almost always there's a silver lining, and you may not find it until years later when you get confronted with some other thing that that struggle years ago prepared you to deal with, and then you're like, oh, that's why that happened, because now I can get through this now. But so I really do believe in silver linings, and I feel like, even just kind of the pondering that happened to arrive at that name, it was myself finding a silver lining in a situation that was super disappointing at the time. And so yeah, even when our writing dives into the darker edges of our genre, I always try to at least insert like a glimmer of hope in there, because I really do believe in silver linings.
Going back to what you said about haters, do you get a lot of haters like on social media, email, etc.?
I feel like I feel like as far as musical artists go, I'm pretty lucky in that regard.
Hmm.
And even more so that the people who do gravitate to our music are just really, really super nice humans. Um, I definitely do get them, right? But I think that everybody, especially musical artists, and I'll go ahead and say anybody who's pursuing anything creative, um, or even putting yourself out there in any way, shape, or form, you are going to find haters, and you just have to kind of, I didn't learn this overnight, but like you just kind of have to find a way to, number one, remind yourself that the only reason that they're lashing out at somebody over the internet is because there's something that they aren't happy with about themselves or their life or like whatever. It's all projection, right? Because if somebody, like, the only reason somebody does that to a random person on the internet is like inner issues. So remind yourself of that. And then my strategy has become kind of like, you know, kill them with kindness. If they say my music sucks, I'll just be like, hey, like, I totally get it. Music is totally subjective, and I'm sorry that like ours isn't for you. But thanks for listening, because regardless, um, they took, at least 15 to 30 seconds to listen to a song, and that's time, and people's time is valuable. So I like to say thank you. And then sometimes, especially if they're like extra vicious about whatever they said about this stuff, um, like, or rather about our music, I'll go so far as to, oh man, and now I'm blanking at my technique. This is like, it's weird. So I'll say thank you for listening. Sorry it wasn't for you. I always finish with hope you have a great day. Um, and oh man, I'm forgetting the middle part, but it's just like I try to be like way nicer than they were, basically. And just, like, you never know what's happening in somebody else's world or in somebody else's day. And I'm a big believer, and of course I'm not a saint, and I don't always remember this, and of course I get triggered at times, same as any other human being, but I do like to lead with empathy whenever I can kind of like muster that in myself, even if somebody's being super rude to me. I remembered the middle part.
Hmm.
I'm glad it made you feel something. There's this thing about, I feel like Rick Rubin has said this, and there's countless creatives that have said this, but you know, when you're making art, you're lucky if half of anyone who hears it or sees it or engages with it likes it, right? Like, everybody has different tastes. And so you have to remember, like, your art is not going to be for everyone. But if people nothing it, that's almost worse than them hating it. So if you have 50% of people who love your stuff and then 50% of people who hate it, you're actually doing a great job because it's making everyone feel something. And that's what art is all about.
That's very true. That is, you hit right on it, right on the point. When did you become interested in music? Like when was it that you felt like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do?
Um, all right. That I guess those are kind of like two different questions. I would say when I became interested in music was like at a very, very young age. And my mom used to play classical records around the house. And I was like maybe 1.5 or 2 years old, and I was like playing in the living room with some blocks, and my mom went out of the room to get something, and there was a Vivaldi concerto on, and she came back, and I was apparently, this is her story, so I cannot verify because I was too young to remember, but I was apparently humming along to Vivaldi by ear. She says flawlessly. I would take that one with a grain of salt. Um, but yeah, so I've always had an interest in music, and once she realized that, she put me in classical violin, followed by classical piano, and all of that kind of stuff. She was a big classical music fan. And, you know, the closest she ever came to rock and roll was the Beatles. So I did grow up on the Beatles, and I love the Beatles to this day. Incredible songwriters, of course. But I always kind of like, in the beginning of my life, music was always work. I would have to practice, I would have to go to my lessons. And whereas classical training really teaches you to read music and not look at your hand, like not look at what your body's doing and just like keep your eyes on the page, that has never really been how my brain wants to operate with music. And so my instructors never really like loved me because I liked to learn by ear, and I liked watching what my fingers were doing, which is of course a big no-no. So in that stage of my life, music always felt like work. and and then I got old enough to kind of gravitate more towards the Beatles and be like, what else is out there? And right around that time, my oldest sister was, I think, a freshman or a sophomore in high school. And one of her best friends made her this mixtape. And to this day, I really, really wish I had like a photo of the sequence, because this mixtape was like, it was amazing, but it was super diverse. Like it had everything from like Jimi Hendrix and Steppenwolf and Led Zeppelin to Pink Floyd and the Police to Metallica to Red Hot Chili Peppers to Nirvana, and I want to say some Stone Temple Pilots on there too. Um, and just like everything in between, like Violent Femmes were in there. It was super diverse, but the whole thing flowed. Like you listen to it, and each side made, like the whole sequence made sense. It would make a really great Spotify playlist, is my point, and I would love to have that playlist. Um, but it opened up my world. Like I'd never heard Metallica. I asked my mom who this guy Jimi Hendrix was, and like she, I won't embarrass her here, but she did not know much about him. Will suffice to say that. Um, I think I asked her why his voice sounded so different from some of these other artists, and obviously it's because he's black, and so he sang things differently, and he had that like kind of grit that Hendrix has. That, you know, I don't know. I guess Kurt Cobain has a different kind of grit. I was trying to make a like comparison, but c'est la vie. I heard all of this stuff that was so different and diverse that I had never heard before. And with all of these different artists interpreting their instruments different, interpreting their vocals different, interpreting the genre that they wanted to play different, right? And specifically I latched on at that time, like I loved the whole mixtape, but I latched on to the fact that Nirvana and Kurt Cobain could write these songs that would like punch you right in the gut or like grab you right by the heart. And they were only 3 chords. And I was like, okay, like I tried dabbling in writing, piano pieces and stuff like that. And I really was very interested in like composers. I studied a lot about like Beethoven and Mozart and Bach, and like um, later on in college, a lot of, different kind of composers edging into the avant-garde. And it's always been an interest to me. But at the time, I was just like, this music feels so good and it's so simple. And so I can do this. I'm going to start here and start trying to write simple songs. And that's when I kind of realized that it was like what I wanted to do, as opposed to kind of like feeling like something that I was studying, you know?
Absolutely. That's a great story, like that's awesome how you became interested in music and all that. And also it's interesting to know that you took um, violin and piano lessons.
And the thing is that like, I feel like I was slightly negative, like saying that I didn't like them and whatever. I actually kick myself for stopping practicing, especially piano. Violin, it's still a stringed instrument, and I still kind of remember my bowing techniques. So if I had one, I could probably like eke out some stuff in the studio. I wouldn't be very good, but I would be good enough to like do some stuff. But piano, I really lost my chops, and it's you know, if there was one thing that I could take back from like my earlier childhood, it would be just maybe not continuing with lessons, but at least continuing with like practicing, so I didn't lose all of that.
So you mentioned your college experience briefly a while ago. So can you tell me about that? Tell me about your college experience.
Yeah, so I went to Northeastern in Boston. And at the time, like when I was applying to schools, I was applying to Northeastern, DePaul in, I want to say that's in Chicago, and then Full Sail, which was a 2-year kind of like recording engineering school. And I chose Northeastern because of their co-op program. But when I got there, the major that I declared that I applied for was music technology. And when I got there, and over the course of my first 2 semesters there, um, I discovered that their music technology program was less about kind of studio engineering and learning the mechanics of all of that. And it was more about electronic music composition, which, while there's nothing wrong with that, it wasn't really what I wanted to be there for. And so I was actually thinking of transferring out after my first year. And I am thankful that my dean checked in with me, and I mentioned that I was kind of like, this wasn't what I was expecting, and I'm thinking about looking at my options for next year. And he was kind of like, well, we're starting up this new dual major, which would allow you to major in multimedia, but keep your music tech concentration. And I'm willing to work with you on kind of tailoring your music tech coursework to focus more. You're going to have to still study composition. That's a prerequisite. We had to study composition every single semester, which I'm actually super thankful for at this point. But we can make sure that your curriculum kind of like leans more towards the sound engineering stuff that you want to do. And then I think you would have a really good head for the multimedia stuff. And so I was like, okay, he was like, just try it for next year. So I decided to give it a try. And it's interesting. So musically speaking, I got a great education there. But then in the other areas of my life that kind of helped me to pay my bills while at the same time pursuing the music that is my passion, because it's really, really hard to make a great living as a musical artist unless you are lucky enough to have the backing of a label and a publisher and management and all of that stuff, and simultaneously really awesome music that millions and millions of people are consuming, right? And that number gets higher and higher as streaming takes over, and like revenue goes down and down. And we don't need to get into all of that, but suffice to say, the multimedia aspect of my studies have really given me a lot of skills that I've been able to then dig into and hone over the years to freelance in other areas and really just, um, be able to pursue everything that I want while at the same time not having to work at a Starbucks. Not that there's anything wrong with Starbucks. I love coffee. But a lot of musicians, they move to LA and they bartend or work at a restaurant or work at a Starbucks, which is it's time and attention consuming. Like, you don't have time to look at your phone when you're doing a job like that. Whereas if I'm doing marketing or software programming or software design on the side, and an email comes in on the music side that I really need to respond to, I can take 5 minutes and switch gears and respond to that really quick and then get back to whatever it is that I'm doing. So it keeps things very flexible, and I feel really lucky about it.